jai, Guru Raj ki jai. Jai Guru Abhimanyu. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this is today we will have a quick look at the summary of the first 12 chapters and make a start from the 13th chapter. So this is a quote by Dr. Thomas Hopkins. Actually, he liked Prabhupada very, very much. This is one little quote from him.
There is little question that this edition is one of the best books available on the Gita and devotion. Prabhupada's translation is an ideal blend of literal accuracy and religious insight.
He's a professor of religion at Franklin and Marshall College. So today I wanted to call upon Partha and Kayan to look at the first 12 chapters. So first 6 chapters, Partha, you ready for us, Partha?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so first chapter. This is mainly just setting the scene. So it begins with Sanjay describing the battlefield for Dhritarashtra, who is asking him. So he's describing the kind of warriors on both sides, like the Pandavas, Drupad on Pandava side, Virat, etc. All of these great fighters, and then on the other side, there's the Kauravas. There's the army is headed by Bhishma Pitama, Karn, Kripacharya, Ashwatthama, etc. So after this, Sanjay describes that Bhishma began by blowing his conch very loudly. So it said that it made the sound like a roar of a lion. And then all of the other conch shells, drums, bugles, trumpets and horns were all sounded suddenly. And the combined sound was tumultuous. So on the other side, Lord Krishna and Arjun, they sounded their conch shells as well, but the sound of their conch shells vibrated both the sky and the earth, and it shattered the hearts of the sons of Dhritarashtra. So then after this, Arjun asked Krishna to take him in the middle of the two armies. He was desiring to see who was fighting on which side. So Krishna led them to the middle in the middle of the battlefield. So then Arjun could see his grandfathers, his fathers, his teachers, his uncles, brothers, sons, grandsons, friends, and also well-wishers. So then Arjun said, "My dear Krishna, seeing my friends and relatives present before me, in such a fighting spirit, I feel the limbs of my body quivering and my mouth drying up." So, like this, he said that his whole body was trembling, hair standing on end, his Gandiva bow was slipping from his hand, and his skin was burning. So, in this way, he said that the sin will overcome us if we slay such aggressors. So he's saying that if he kills these people, then there'll be great sin involved, and what happiness could be gained from killing his kinsmen. So he said, "Better for me if the sons of Dhritarashtra, weapons in hand, were to kill me unarmed and unresisting on the battlefield." So then he lay his bow and arrows down on the chariot, and he was overwhelmed with grief. So then chapter 2 begins with Krishna telling Arjun, asking Arjun, how have these impurities come upon you? So he's saying, give up such weakness of heart and arise. So give up such petty weakness of heart. So Krishna is calling it petty weakness. And Arjun says to this, "So now I am confused about my duty and have lost all composure because of miserly weakness. So in this condition, I am asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I am your disciple, a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. And he said, Govinda, I shall not fight. And he fell silent. So then Krishna said, he said that you are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. So those in text 11 he says, those who are wise lament neither for the living nor for the dead. And there was never a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all of these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. And he's describing the soul. So as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to old age, to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. So he's describing that we're not this body with the spirit soul. That's his first instruction. And he says that just like the changing of the summer and winter seasons, just as they come and go, happiness and distress come and go. And he says a person who is not disturbed by happiness or distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for liberation. And those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the material body there is no endurance, and of the soul there is no change. And he describes the soul, which is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. And he's describing a few of the conditions. So it's undestructible, eternal, unborn, immutable. So it cannot be killed. It cannot be cut to pieces by any weapon, burned by fire, moistened by water, withered by wind, etc. So it's unbreakable, insoluble, neither burned nor dried. And he says it's invisible, inconceivable, and immutable. So knowing this, you should not grieve for the body. So he says in text 27, one who has taken his birth is sure to die, and after birth, one is sure to take birth. After death, one is sure to take birth again. So therefore, in the unavoidable discharge of your duty, you should not lament. So he's just impressing on Arjun that the person who dwells in the body cannot be killed, cannot be slain. And he says, as a Kshatriya, there is no better occupation, there's no better engagement than fighting on religious principles, so you should not hesitate. And he says, so he flips it. He says, as Arjun said, he would incur great sin by killing all of these people. But Krishna says he'll incur great sin by neglecting his duties. So other way around. And he says he will lose his reputation as a fighter. And for a Kshatriya, that's dishonor is worse than death. And he says, either you will be killed on the battlefield and attain the heavenly planets, or you will conquer and enjoy earthly kingdom. So fight with determination. And also Krishna says, fight for the sake of fighting. So without considering happiness, distress, loss or gain, victory or defeat. And then if you do so, you will never incur sin. So you're just impressing upon Arjun not to be attached to the results, not to be attached to sense enjoyment or material opulence. He describes the Vedas as having much flowery words, and which recommend various activities for elevation to heavenly planets or to good families, etc. But these are all subject to the material modes of nature, and he's impressing on Arjun to go beyond that. And he's going to describe what yoga is in a minute. And he also says, those who want to enjoy the fruits of their work are misers. And a man engaged in devotional service rids himself of both good and bad reactions, even in this life. So therefore strive for yoga, which is the art of all work. And later on he'll describe exactly what yoga is. So Arjun then asks Krishna, so what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak, and what is his language? How does he sit, and how does he walk? So Krishna says, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, and when his mind finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. So one who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated when there's happiness, who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. So he's not affected by whatever good or evil he may obtain. He's able to withdraw his senses from sense objects. And he also emphasizes that the senses are so strong that they forcibly carry away the mind, even of a man of discrimination who is endeavoring to control them. Arjun said, I think later Arjun says it's harder to control the wind than the mind. So Krishna says, one who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, is known as a man of steady intelligence. And he also describes that a person develops attachment for objects, and then from such attachment, lust develops, and then from lust, anger arises. From anger, complete delusion arises, and then from delusion, bewilderment of memory. And then when the memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. And when the intelligence is lost, then one falls down again into the material pool. So for one, thus satisfied in Krishna consciousness, the threefold miseries of material existence no longer exist. And one who is not connected with the Supreme can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind. So there is no possibility of peace. And without peace, how can there be happiness? So happiness requires peace. And he says that as a strong wind sweeps up a boat from the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. So one must not be disturbed by the incessant flow of desires, which are like rivers into the ocean. And then by that alone can one achieve peace. And then chapter 3 is Karma Yoga. So Arjun asks, so why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare if you think that intelligence is better than fruit of work? So now Krishna says, not merely by abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection. So everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. So no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. So even if one restrains the senses of action, the mind dwells on such sense objects. And then he said this person clearly deludes himself and is called a pretender. And then on the other hand, he says, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga in Krishna consciousness without attachment, he is far superior. So he says, perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working. And work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. So he's emphasizing the point that one should work but not be attached to the fruits of these activities. And by that, one can attain the Supreme. He gives examples such as kings like Janak attained perfection solely by performance of prescribed duties. Therefore, for the sake of educating the people in general, you should perform your work. So he's telling him to set an example so all of the common men, all of the world can follow. So he says, surrender all your work to me. That's the main emphasis of what he's saying. And then Arjun asks, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? And then Krishna simply says, it is lust only, Arjun, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion, and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Senses, the mind, and intelligence are sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So lust is the main thing to overcome. And this can be overcome by regulating the senses and slain by knowledge and self-realization. So he says that the working senses are far superior to dull matter. The mind is higher than the senses, intelligence is still higher than the mind, and then the soul is even higher than intelligence. So then chapter 4, Krishna says he instructed this science of yoga to Vivaswan, the sun god, who instructed it to Manu, who instructed it to Ikshvaku. So then by this dislipic succession, the saintly kings understood it. But then in time, this succession was broken and the science was lost. So then Krishna asks, how, if the sun god Vivaswan is older than you, how did you instruct him in the beginning? So then Krishna says, many births have passed for me and you. Even if you can't remember all of your births, I remember all of them. And he says that whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, then he will descend. So a rise of irreligion, then he will descend. So then he will deliver the pious and annihilate the miscreants, and re-establish the principles of religion. And he also says that even though he created the system of the 4 divisions of human society, etc., even though he is the creator, he says, you should know that I am not the doer, being unchangeable. Sorry, I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. So he says, there is no work that affects me, nor do I aspire for the fruits of action. One who understands this truth about me also does not become entangled in the fruit of reactions of work. And then he goes on to describe, what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. Akarma, vikarma, and karma. So, if you abandon all attachment to the results of your activities, then you become ever satisfied and independent. Even though you may be engaged in all kinds of undertakings, you'll still be unaffected by them. So he says that such a man of understanding acts with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled. Now, chapter 5, Karma Yoga, Action, and Krishna Consciousness. So Krishna goes on to So Arjun first asks, first of all, you ask me to renounce work, and then again, you recommend work with devotion. Now will you kindly tell me definitely which of the two is more beneficial? So then Krishna says, the renunciation of work and work in devotion are both good for liberation. But of the two, work in devotional service is better than renunciation of work. So merely renouncing all activities and not engaging in devotional service cannot make one happy. Um, then he describes when one's intelligence, mind, and faith and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge, and proceeds straight on the path of liberation. And the humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog-eater. So they're fixed in sameness, they're established in sameness and equanimity. You know, they've conquered all of the material misgivings, and they are flawless like Brahman. And he says these people are actually the perfect mystic, not those people who are renouncing all work and trying to do nothing. So chapter 6 is Dhyan Yoga. So a person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desire, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. So one must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. So if one conquers the mind, then the mind is the best of friends. But when one fails to do so, then the mind remains the greatest enemy. Now, Krishna goes on to describe how one should practice yoga. So one should go to a secluded place, lay kusha grass on the ground, and cover it with deerskin and a soft cloth. The seat should neither be too high or too low, should be situated in a sacred place. The yogi should sit firmly and practice yoga to purify the heart. One should hold one's body, neck, and head erect in a straight line and stare steadily at the tip of one's nose. And one should meditate upon me within the heart and make me the ultimate goal of life. So there is no possibility of one becoming a yogi if one eats too much or eats too little, sleeps too much or does not sleep enough. So those who are regulated in their habits of eating, sleeping, recreation, and work can mitigate all material pains by practicing the yoga system. So then in this stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, then one can fix their mind upon upon the self and see the self by pure mind. But then Arjun says to Krishna, what you've described as the system of yoga you've described is appears impractical and unendurable to me, for the mind is restless and unsteady. And he says the mind is more difficult to control than the wind. But he says, so Krishna says, it is possible to curb the restless mind by suitable practice and by detachment. So self-realization is difficult for one whose mind is unbridled and free. But when one controls the mind and who strives by appropriate means, is assured of success. And Arjun also asks, what happens to the yogi who's unsuccessful in his practice? So the unsuccessful yogi, will be will take birth in a pious family, born to righteous people, or a family of rich aristocrats, and then from here he can take up he can revive the divine consciousness of his previous life and make further progress. Yeah, and then Krishna ends with by saying, a yogi is greater than the ascetic, greater than the empiricist, and greater than the fruitive worker. Therefore, O Arjun, in all circumstances, be a yogi. And of all yogis, the one with great faith, who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me, he is the most intimately united with me in yoga, and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. And that ends chapter 6.
Very good. Thank you very much. It's well summarized. And the only thing I think I would have added was in chapter 4, how Krishna explains the process of acquiring knowledge, and one of the ways he recommends is one to take a spiritual master, and in that way serve a spiritual master and gain transcendental knowledge. But yeah, this is
Oh yeah, I think I missed that. I think I skimmed over it.
good. And the first 6 chapters, of course, deal with karma yoga, and then the next 6 will deal with bhakti yoga. And this is where Kayan, you with us?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try and attempt to summarize chapters 7 to 12. It's gonna be a difficult task, especially as coming after Parth Prabhu. You know, he did such a great job. You know, I'll try, I'll try my best.
You'll be absolutely fine.
So the first chapter I'm gonna try and summarize is chapter 7, and that's entitled "The Knowledge of the Absolute," and quite rightly, Krishna Bhagavan imparts this knowledge to Arjun. So in this chapter, Krishna Bhagavan explains how all living beings, all creations are within him, and how essentially this Maya nature of this world traps devotees in this cycle of birth, death, because of the swabhavs that the body pertains, right? The characteristics of the human condition, be that, you know, greed, lust, anger, etc. And fundamentally, the true devotee does not worship lesser gods, but fully surrenders to Krishna, essentially, which is a core crux of Krishna consciousness. And so when we are on this world, we are trapped by these sort of three guns, and we don't necessarily recognize Krishna as being the eternal essence of all. And within this chapter, Krishna Bhagavan explains how there are 4 types of people that wish to worship him. It's the person in distress, it's the power seeker, the wisdom seeker, and the sage. And so he explains that these are the 4 types of people that want to worship him, but how should he be understood? How exactly should worshippers understand him? And he explains in this chapter that he is both the essence of the universe, and he's also the material of the universe, which is quite interesting. And he explains to Arjun that often people are misled by the parts of him and the world, because fundamentally he's the one that is giving us all of this sort of, because he's the cause of all causes, the sense gratification at times kind of takes over, and we don't worship him, which is a failure on our part. And so understanding him to be the essence of all is really important. So whilst he sort of tells us, okay, this is how he wants to be understood, this is what he is, we still have this question of how exactly do we attain Krishna Bhagavan, right? How exactly do we do that? We understand who you are, but how do we attain you? And this is what Krishna Bhagavan kind of explains within the 8th chapter, which is entitled Attaining the Supreme. And the chapter starts off with sort of 8 distinct questions. Sort of what is Brahman, etc. Very interesting questions. But then Krishna goes on to explain how exactly we can attain him, and that is through our last thought at death determines the afterlife, determines the sort of the after effect. But fundamentally, we are bound by this sort of cycle of birth and death, and it's only by turning to Krishna are we then free from it. Furthermore, the importance of Bhakti Yoga is emphasized in this chapter. Understanding Krishna, remembering Krishna, making him a part of your life is an essential factor when it comes to thinking about him at the time of death. Because we are so caught up, I guess, within sense gratification that we may remember something completely different at that time of death. We may not necessarily remember Krishna. And so Bhakti Yoga is really important, because if we are committing every action towards him through our Bhakti, we will then remember him at the time of death, which is really important. So that's my kind of summary of the 8th chapter. The 9th chapter is entitled The Most Confidential Knowledge. And to a certain extent, it is an expansion or sort of reiteration of chapter 7. But here Krishna talks about the power and ease of devotion, which can transform the heart and bring Krishna closer to you. He explains the ultimate goal to Arjuna, which is that everything that you are doing, all the actions, all the austerities, all the charities that you are doing, it's all aimed at this one thing of attaining Krishna. And so always remember him and never forget him. But fundamentally use all the talents that you may have. And I guess we can kind of sort of put this to our lives, whether that be we're great singers or great orators or great cooks, etc. We can always use that towards him. And he says within the 9th chapter, I forgot which verse, I think it's verse 26, where he talks about one flower, one fruit, one water, and he'll accept all of this. But he's not necessarily interested within the material item. He's not necessarily interested in that flower or that fruit or that water, but he's interested within the bhav. He's interested with the bhakti that you kind of give it with, I guess. And furthermore, Krishna reminds Arjuna that there are, wise, pure individuals out there that may follow other scriptures. They may follow the Vedas, for example, and they may reach higher planets and experience the divine pleasures. But once all of those pleasures are sort of done with, they will then have to return to this sort of mortal realm and endeavor again on the path of sort of spirituality, because fundamentally it is Krishna. He's the supreme goal, and never to forget that. And so whilst we can pray to gods or sort of demigods, the only effect that will bring is that of sort of material success, which is nice. Everyone wants material success, but it's not everlasting. And then the chapter 10 is entitled The Opulence of the Absolute. And through Krishna's grace, he provides wisdom and delivers the truth and talks about his eminence, his sort of supremeness in the world. He's been trying to explain his current manifestation to Arjuna, that of him in the chariot, and this personal form is the best form to worship. Why? Because you have this sort of focus. If we were to think of the supremacy of the Lord, the fact that he is in absolutely everything, the cause of all causes, it is a quite a difficult thing to focus upon. But if we are to think of him as just sort of playful, this sort of playful boy with the flutes, that image is very striking, a lot more easier to focus upon because it's so personal. However, Arjun still isn't really satisfied. He still wants to know about all the other forms, all the other divine forms that Krishna has. Even though Krishna Bhagavan is trying to explain to him that they're sort of ultimately irrelevant. And this is the form I want you to focus upon. This is the form that I want you to do bhakti towards. Yet Krishna Bhagavan explains that he is in each place within the cosmos. He's in every single, sort of planet. He's in every atom. He even goes on to say that he's in the letter A in the alphabet. He's even in the swift toss of a dice. He's in every action. And fundamentally, one of his manifestations is the self, is the Atma. And so if we have that understanding, we understand that Krishna Bhagavan is part and parcel of us, and he resides within the soul. And this is very, very important. And so, to a certain extent, sort of focusing on the self, i.e. the Atma, so having the Atma realization is one form of, I guess, worship and of bhakti, of understanding yourself to be the Atma, not necessarily the body. I'm not too sure if that makes sense. Maybe I did something wrong there. I apologize.
No, that's okay, Kayan. Like one time Madhusudan Prabhu said, Guru Maharaj said, if you understand the Atma, then you've better chance of grasping the philosophy. And the understanding of Atma is actually Sankhya Yoga, which is the difference between matter and spirit. So just understanding that alone actually can liberate you. May not take you to Krishna's planet, but at least you're in a position, there's a good foundation. So what you said is okay. It's good. Thank you. Keep going. You haven't quite finished yet.
Yeah, so I've got 2 more chapters to do. So chapter. Unmute. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry.
So chapter 11 is entitled the universal form, and here this is a very interesting chapter because Krishna Bhagavan, we've seen him in the chariot. We've heard him explain all of his different forms, his eminence within the universe. Yet Arjun isn't really convinced here. He wants to see some more. And in this chapter, we kind of see this sort of cosmic revelation. And this revelation is being shown to Arjun. He sees his enemies being destroyed, etc. But he also sees something very important, and that is the the Vishwarup of Krishna Bhagavan. There's sort of in all of his magnificence. But when he sees this form, not only is he sort of surprised, bewildered, and amazed, but he's also scared. He even says within verse 31, he says, "Please tell me who you are." And so I guess what we can kind of gain from that is, despite Krishna Bhagavan being in the chariot with him all this time, seeing this form, he almost doesn't recognize him to a certain extent. It's too magnificent, and even kind of scary, even kind of terrifying. But he begs Krishna Bhagavan, he bows down to him and asks him to return back to his sort of original form. And of course, the Supreme Lord obliges and sort of consoles Arjun. Don't be afraid. And I guess one thing that I wanted to sort of touch upon in this chapter is, I guess, the importance of a guru. Because if the Supreme Lord were to sort of show his pure magnificence, we may not necessarily understand it. We may become scared. And so the importance of the Guru in this aspect is having someone that fully understands Krishna Bhagavan and then can take us towards him. I think that's sort of one point that I sort of thought about whilst reading this chapter. And then we have the chapter 12 entitled Devotional Service. And essentially here Krishna Bhagavan is telling us that devotion is the sort of easier path to do. And furthermore, Krishna Bhagavan outlines the qualities of a devotee who are dear to him, which is really pertinent, because Krishna Bhagavan insists that meditating wholly on Krishna will lead a person to him. And so by understanding what characteristics he likes, we can also understand what characteristics are counterproductive towards his worship. Having anger, having greed, having all of these kind of swabhavas are not necessarily productive and conducive towards Krishna Bhagavan's bhakti, right? Worship towards him, which is quite nice. We understand through the qualities that Krishna Bhagavan sets out that what exactly we should aspire to have, or what we should aspire to get rid of. And he advocates primarily for sort of devotional love, bhakti yoga, arguing that this is sort of a more easier, more focused path. And I guess he explains this by how exactly do we do bhakti yoga? By making sure that every action that we do is towards him. When we get up in the morning, we're getting up for Krishna. When we take a shower, we're taking a shower for Krishna. When we're eating, we're making sure that the body has enough energy so that we can do bhakti. So that's kind of my summary of the 6 chapters. Hopefully it was okay. If I made any mistakes, please do forgive me. But yeah.
It was good. I enjoyed listening to you. I enjoyed listening to Parth. You get a little different take on the 6th chapter, which is good. And it shows the value of the younger devotees getting involved. And I certainly liked Sanjana's sort of summaries as well. And we've got, quite a few other young people in this forum. There's Geeta, there's Preeti, there's Chitra, who's the daughter of Karuna, and that. And I think I'd quite like to hear them at some point as well. And because I don't know how you found this exercise, Kayan and Partha, but you had to also think a little bit about how the relevance of Gita, right?
Yes.
And that's surely very good for you. But also when you convey it, you have a little different slant, different thing. It might help somebody understand Gita a little bit better as well. So I really liked it. Very good effort from both of you. Anybody like to add anything or comment or anything?
Harbol Nabi.
Hare
Krishna, all of you. Yeah, very nice, concise kind of summary of all the 12 chapters we've covered, and it's amazing that we've come to 3/4 of the Bhagavad Gita, and we got 6 more chapters to go, which is nice. And some of the attendees have regularly participated and given their realizations as well as we've gone through. So, which is nice, at this stage. And now that the next 6 chapters are going to be a bit of a challenge as well, but it's nice to go through, and hope they all stick to it to the end. Yeah, good. Well done. Well done, Kayan and Parth. Nice summaries. Okay, yeah. Next stage.
Good. Yeah, we're almost out of time. I just wanted to give a little introduction, I think, to chapter. These are the Gyan Yoga section, and Krishna gives a lot more detail on certain aspects of transcendental knowledge, and they can be a little challenging. I liked Kayan's point. He made one really amazing point. In fact, he made many good points, as did Parth, but especially this one point about how one should remember Krishna always and never forget him. And that's actually the absolute essence of the Bhagavad Gita. Remember Krishna, never forget him. So that's easy to understand Gita from that point of view. But when we're trying to understand Gita from the point of view of the material nature, the Atma, the universe, and the Lord, and the relationships between them, of course, that is very intricate, and it can get very complex. And sometimes it's good to understand the complexity, or try to understand the complexity, so that it gives us a little bit more faith, a little bit more foundation to our belief. Otherwise, it could possibly be just sentimental belief. Sentimental belief directed at the right place is fine, but the problem with sentimental belief is it can be shaken easily. But if we have firm transcendental knowledge, which is the foundation of our bhakti, then we may have challenges that we face, but we won't get swayed by those challenges. So this is why Gyan, the next 6 chapters, are actually quite important to understand. It'll help us a little bit more in-depth understanding of this world, ourselves, and the Supreme Lord as well, how the interaction takes place. There was one man who came to Srila Prabhupada and he said to him, I've been reading Bhagavad Gita for 4 months and I still don't understand it at all. Prabhupada said, okay, you've actually understood the Bhagavad Gita properly. Because the whole idea of Bhagavad Gita is if you think you've understood it, you haven't understood it, because Bhagavad Gita is a summary of all Vedic knowledge. And Vedic knowledge is very complex. And Bhagavad Gita, similarly, is complex, especially if you want to understand some more finer details. So I would say don't lose patience. We may go to the next 6 chapters, and we've tried to make it as edible or understandable as possible. But it will take time. But more importantly, we have to do service. This is not just an intellectual exercise to understand the Gita. To actually understand the Gita and the complexities of the philosophy, we have to perform Bhakti Yoga. That means chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, serving the devotees, associating with devotees, doing some practical service. That really, like I may have said this before, one time Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was asked a question by, he's the spiritual master of Srila Prabhupada. He was asked a question by somebody in the audience. And Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati said, go and wash the dishes in the kitchen. Unusual request to a question. So the man, very humble, he went to the kitchen, he washed up, then he came back. And then Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati said, yes, so what was your question? And the man said, actually, my question has been answered while I was doing the service. So service is quite important because many things get revealed automatically when we do say that. And yeah, we can talk further tomorrow about chapter. We can start with chapter 13. I'd like to thank everybody for hanging in there. And as Madhusudan said, it's amazing we got this far with pretty much everybody intact. This is a wonderful journey. It's a glorious journey. I'm so happy to be in this journey with all of you. And let's see if we can continue towards the supreme prosperity. Thank you very, very much for being with us. It's been a really amazing journey so far. And we've got a long way to go, but it's a sweet journey. Thank you. So Karuna Bandha, we can maybe chant the Shingra cover.